He had a first-class ticket, a federal badge, and the quiet dignity of a man who spent a lifetime serving justice. But she still told him he didn't belong. Why did a respected black judge get forced out of his seat while everyone around him stayed silent? If you believe dignity matters, show your support with a like and hit subscribe for more stories that speak volumes. Now here's how it all began. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across Gate 22B, casting long shadows across the tiled floor of Chicago O'Hare. Businessmen scrolled through emails, a toddler napped on her mother's lap, and overhead the boarding call echoed. Flight 714, Horizon Air to Washington, D.C., now boarding all first-class passengers. He rose quietly. Elias Monroe, 56, tall, deliberate, the kind of man who didn't need to speak to be heard, adjusted the strap of his worn leather briefcase. His navy blue suit was tailored but understated. His shoes shined but modestly. And tucked inside the inner pocket of his jacket was not a tablet or a travel itinerary, but a thin book of poetry, its spine softened by time. As he walked down the jet bridge, there was no entourage, no name tag, no signal that he had spent over 3 decades in the courtroom, upholding constitutional law, overseeing cases that shaped the lives of thousands. No one would have guessed that the man boarding that plane was a federal judge. At the cabin door, he offered a soft smile and a slight nod to the attendant. Good afternoon. He didn't expect fanfare. He never had. He simply located seat 1A, stepped into the row, and lowered himself into the seat with quiet precision. He placed his briefcase beneath his feet, fastened his seatbelt, and pulled the poetry book from his jacket. The hum of the cabin surrounded him, casual conversations, overhead bins latching shut, the rustle of newspapers. He was comfortable in silence. He had lived most of his life in rooms where silence meant gravity. But silence was about to be tested. From the front galley, Kara Benson moved with mechanical poise. 43 years old, crisp uniform, hair tightly pinned, every crease and protocol perfectly in place. She had worked for Horizon for almost 2 decades, and she prided herself on maintaining order in her cabin. Her eyes scanned first class with a practiced rhythm, checking seat numbers against mental snapshots. But then she stopped. Her gaze landed on seat 1A. Her brows knit just for a second. She approached. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice even but edged. "Can I see your boarding pass again?" Elias looked up, surprised but composed. Of course. He reached into his coat and handed it over without hesitation. She glanced down. Seat 1A. Elias Monroe, first class. She blinked once, then twice, as if hoping the words would shift. "This seat is reserved for first-class passengers, sir," she said slowly, deliberately. Elias met her eyes. "I am in first class." Kara hesitated. There was no problem with the name, no issue with the seat, but something inside her, it wasn't written in any manual, said this didn't look right. She smiled tightly. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to move to economy while we sort this out." Elias closed his book gently. "Is there a reason for that?" Kara straightened her posture. "I just need to clear the seat for now. There may have been a system error." There wasn't, but she didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. He saw it in her eyes, the kind of look that didn't question policies, only appearances. He exhaled softly, not in protest, but in understanding. Without a word, Elias unfastened his belt, picked up his briefcase, and stood. He didn't argue, he didn't demand, he didn't make a scene. And that's what made the moment unforgettable. As he turned to walk back through the aisle, a hush seemed to follow in his footsteps. Several passengers glanced up, then quickly looked away. One man furrowed his brow, as if realizing something wasn't right but choosing silence over discomfort. Another woman lowered her magazine and watched him, stunned. Elias walked with dignity, and that walk, quiet, steady, unwilling to stoop, was louder than any raised voice could have been. He disappeared into the back of the plane, and in 1A, a silence settled that no seatbelt could hold down. Kara Benson adjusted the sleeves of her jacket and walked back toward the first-class galley, her heels clicking with confidence. The cabin buzzed with low conversation, the kind of gentle noise that masked tension just beneath the surface. To her it was done, handled, order restored. She smoothed her hair in the mirrored panel above the coffee machine and let out a quiet breath, pleased with her decision. She had followed her instinct, the same instinct that had kept her on point for nearly 2 decades. Behind her, a pair of eyes followed her silently. Marisol Vega, 26, stood near the beverage cart, her hands clasped at her waist, the ID tag on her lanyard flipping slowly with the breeze from the air vent. Fresh out of Horizon's training program, she was still new to the rhythm of the sky, still learning when to speak and when to stay quiet. But what she had just witnessed didn't feel like something she should stay quiet about. She'd seen the man, heard the exchange, watched him hand over his boarding pass. There was no mistake. He belonged in seat 1A. So why was he walking toward the back, holding himself together while the world politely looked away? Kara poured herself a cup of coffee and turned to Marisol. "You always have to stay alert in this cabin," she said with a knowing smile. "First class isn't just about service. It's about presence, poise, professionalism." Marisol didn't respond. Kara continued, sipping her coffee. "Some passengers just don't match the seat. Trust your gut, it never lies." That sentence hung in the air like a static charge. Marisol forced a small nod, but inside something twisted. She'd always believed that judgment required evidence, not instinct. That's what training had taught her. But here in the air, that rule seemed more flexible, or maybe more dangerous. Meanwhile, several rows back, Elias Monroe sat with his knees barely fitting into the narrow legroom of economy row 32F. He had not opened his book again. Instead, he sat motionless, shoulders square, eyes calm. He pulled out his phone, unlocked it with a fingerprint, and typed with surgical precision. "Removed from 1A. No cause. Boarding pass verified." He hit send. The message traveled silently from his phone to the inbox of Camille Rourke, Executive Director of Internal Oversight at Horizon Air. It was only 12 words long, but it was enough. Enough to start a chain of actions that would outpace anything Kara Benson had ever anticipated. Back in first class, Kara continued arranging napkins and drink orders as if nothing had happened. The cabin felt restored to her usual standards, quiet, elegant, composed. But to Marisol, something felt off. The silence no longer felt serene, it felt strained, thin, like a curtain stretched too tight over something no one wanted to see. She glanced toward the back of the plane. Through the soft division curtain, she could just make out the figure of Elias, sitting straight, hands folded, not reading, not looking up, just still. There was something about that stillness that felt louder than any raised voice. And Marisol knew, without quite understanding how she knew, that whatever had just happened wasn't over. Not even close. At exactly 4:42 p.m., the message arrived. Camille Rourke was seated in a quiet corner of Horizon Air's executive floor, her office walled in glass and lined with framed citations of leadership excellence. She'd just returned from a briefing on bias training initiatives and was sipping lukewarm tea when the notification pinged softly on her encrypted device. Subject line, cabin incident, flight 714. She tapped the screen, not expecting anything beyond the routine. But the moment she saw the name at the bottom of the report, her spine stiffened. Elias Monroe. The room seemed to still. She whispered it aloud, barely audible. No, not him. Camille knew that name too well to ignore. Elias Monroe wasn't just a federal judge. He was a sitting advisor to the Aviation Ethics and Oversight Committee, an independent panel that reviewed systemic racial bias in commercial travel. He had testified before Congress, had written landmark opinions on anti-discrimination law, had helped shape the very protocols Horizon claimed to uphold. And now, according to this message, one of her own flight attendants had asked that man to vacate his seat, a seat he was rightfully assigned. No outburst, no headline, no press release, just 12 words, calmly typed. And Camille understood what that meant. Monroe hadn't sent this to make noise. He'd sent it to give them a chance to do the right thing before the world found out. She closed her laptop, stood, and crossed the room to a locked wall panel. She scanned her ID badge and keyed in a short code connecting directly to the operations floor. The screen lit up. Ops Command, this is Camille Rourke. Patch me through to the cockpit of Flight 714, priority override. There was a short delay. Then a voice came through, slightly static. This is Captain Richard Ames. Captain, Camille said, voice level but sharp. I need to verify something immediately. A passenger, Judge Elias Monroe, was seated in 1A. I need confirmation. Was he removed from that seat? There was silence on the line. Then, yes, I was just informed of it moments ago. Camille's lips pressed together. And is he currently in his assigned seat? Not yet, but we're in the process of... She cut him off. No delays, no excuses. Judge Monroe is not just another passenger. He is a federal judge, an ethics advisor to the FAA, and someone with full jurisdiction to escalate this within the next 10 minutes. I understand, the captain replied. The tone of his voice changed, more alert now, like he just realized the altitude had dropped mid-flight. Camille exhaled through her nose. This is no longer a seating issue. This is a legal and reputational crisis. You fix it before wheels touch down. Yes, ma'am. She ended the call, and for a moment, she just stood there, still, composed, but fully aware that the next hour would determine whether this became a brief internal memo or a nationwide scandal. The cockpit door slid open with a soft mechanical hiss. Kara Benson stepped inside, her posture straight as ever, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed a stiffness she hadn't noticed until now. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer with practiced grace, then met the eyes of Captain Richard Ames. He wasn't smiling. "Shut the door, please," he said. She obeyed. The hum of the engines outside seemed louder in the sudden silence. The cockpit, usually a space she passed by without notice, now felt tighter, smaller, like a room waiting to pass judgment. The captain didn't ease into it. "Did you remove a man for seat 1A who had a valid first-class ticket?" Kara blinked. The question landed harder than expected, like a sudden drop in altitude. "I just say yes," she said cautiously, "but I wasn't sure Did he show you his boarding pass?" "Yes." "Was the name correct?" "Yes, but..." "Was the seat assignment correct?" She hesitated, then nodded. It said 1A. Captain Ames inhaled sharply and leaned back. "Then what exactly was the issue?" Kara's voice tightened, like something trying to hold its shape under pressure. "He just didn't look like he belonged up there. I assumed there was a system glitch, maybe an upgrade error." A long pause filled the air between them. Then the captain said, without raising his voice, "That's the problem." Kara opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at her hands, fingers folded too neatly over each other. "He didn't cause a scene," she added quickly. "He complied, quietly." The captain's eyes narrowed. "He didn't have to cause a scene, because now we have one. That man is Judge Elias Monroe. He serves on the FAA Ethics Board and has direct lines to legal, federal, and regulatory oversight." Kara's mouth went dry. "Camille Rourke called me personally," the captain continued. "She said this is not a seating issue anymore. It's a reputational threat to the airline." Kara's throat clenched. "I didn't know who he was." "I'm not upset that you didn't know who he was," the captain said calmly. "I'm upset that you assumed who he wasn't." That line landed harder than anything else. He turned his gaze toward the instruments for a second, steadying himself, then looked back at her. "You're going to go back there. You're going to apologize, and you're going to return him to his seat." She didn't speak. He added firmly, "Now." Kara nodded almost imperceptibly, then turned on her heel. As the cockpit door slid open again, the cool air from the cabin rushed against her skin like a slap. She stepped out, closing the door behind her. And for the first time in years, the self-assurance she wore like armor began to crack. Her hands, always steady, now tingled with sweat. She smoothed the front of her uniform, glanced down the aisle, and took one long breath. Then she started walking back, not with the stride of command she was known for, but with something unfamiliar. Caution. Kara's shoes moved across the cabin carpet with practiced steps, but each footfall now felt heavier. The low hum of the engines filled the silence that no one dared to break. Every row she passed felt like a hallway of eyes, though most pretended not to look. She found him in 32F, still, composed, hands resting on a closed book of poetry. He hadn't moved since she left him there. The overhead light above him cast a soft glow across his shoulders, making him look both grounded and untouchable, like a monument no one could approach. She knelt slightly, not quite squatting, not quite standing, as if unsure where her authority stood anymore. "Sir," she said softly, "there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to invite you to return to your seat in first class." He didn't look up at first. She waited. Then slowly, Elias Monroe lifted his gaze. His eyes met hers, not angry, not cold, but steady, like a tide that knows it can't be pushed back. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he studied her for a moment that stretched longer than comfort allowed. Then, with a voice even and slow, he asked, "You checked my pass. You had my name. Why me?" Kara opened her mouth, but no words came. The cabin seemed to still. A man 3 rows up lowered his newspaper. A woman across the aisle shifted in her seat, suddenly aware of the tension she'd tried to ignore. Even the baby that had been softly fussing a minute earlier had gone silent, as if the weight of the question had drawn breath from the air. Kara's lips parted again, but nothing followed. Elias closed his book, calmly, deliberately. He slid it back into his coat pocket, stood up, picked up his briefcase from under the seat, and waited. Kara gestured slightly toward the front. This way. He didn't look at her, he simply walked, and Kara followed. But this time, every step she took beside him felt exposed, as though she were being escorted. She were being observed. Her body remained upright, uniform unwrinkled, posture correct. But inside, something had fractured. The silence behind them followed like an echo, and every foot of that aisle felt longer than it had earlier that afternoon. As they approached the first-class curtain, a few passengers looked up. Others averted their eyes, not out of indifference, but shame. They had seen. They had said nothing. And now, as the man returned to his rightful place, their silence pressed in heavier than any turbulence. Elias stepped into row 1 without pause. He didn't glance back, didn't flinch. He placed his bag gently beneath the seat, sat down, buckled in. Then he pulled his book out again. He opened to the same page, but this time he didn't read it. His eyes rested on the words, but they didn't move. Outside the window, clouds passed. Inside, the world had shifted, not because he spoke loudly, but because he hadn't needed to. And still, he carried the weight of it all without anyone else lifting a finger. Somewhere in row 3C, just behind the curtain of first class, a young man sat hunched slightly over his phone, his thumb hovering above the screen. Tyson Ford, 23 years old, was a senior at Howard University School of Law. He had boarded Flight 714 that afternoon en route to visit his sister in D.C. and prepare for a summer clerkship at the Department of Justice. But what had just unfolded in front of him wasn't something he could file away for later. He had seen it happen. The glance, the request, the quiet walk to the back of the plane. It had struck something in him, deep and visceral. He hadn't planned to record anything. But the moment Elias stood and calmly picked up his briefcase, Tyson's instincts kicked in. Without drawing attention, he had tapped his camera app and let it run. Not out of malice or curiosity, but because something inside told him, "You may need to prove this happened." Now, with the phone resting in his palm, the footage replayed silently on the screen. It was only 47 seconds long, but it said everything. Elias Monroe, dressed impeccably, calmly offering his boarding pass. The flight attendant's stiff posture. Her quiet insistence that he return to economy while we sort this out. And then the walk. The long, lonely walk down the aisle, under the watchful, silent eyes of fellow passengers. No yelling, no arguing. Just a man who knew what injustice looked like, and knew that sometimes silence could be louder than rage. Tyson swallowed hard and opened his social media app. He typed a caption, fast and raw, his thumbs moving faster than his thoughts. Black judge removed from first class. No explanation, no resistance, just silence. Is this what justice looks like? He tapped upload, then locked the screen. He didn't expect it to go anywhere. But across the cabin, in seat 6D, a woman refreshed her feed and saw the post, followed by a subtle gasp. She nudged the man beside her. The man whispered to his colleague in row 7. By the time the wheels of Flight 714 touched down, the clip had been viewed over 80,000 times, and the number was rising. The hashtag started to build. Judge Ferrier and first class voice belonged there. Within 45 minutes, legal blogs had picked it up. Activist accounts with hundreds of thousands of followers were stitching commentary on top of the video, dissecting every line, every posture, every silence. A former FAA investigator tweeted, "If what I'm seeing is true, Horizon Air better prepare for federal review." Camille Rourke's phone buzzed again, then again, and again. She turned off the vibration and opened her inbox. Subject, Crisis Comms Flag, Flight 714. From Corporate Communications to Camille Rourke, Executive Team. Urgent social video involving passenger removal on Flight 714 has gone viral. Confirmed subject is Federal Judge Elias Monroe. Media outlets have begun inquiries. Narrative forming without input. PR meltdown in progress. Recommend immediate coordination with legal. Camille didn't flinch. She had been in the industry long enough to know when a fire started in the walls and not just the surface. She tapped her Bluetooth headset and walked briskly into her private conference room, glass walls dimming automatically behind her. "Connect me to legal and external affairs," she said to the digital assistant. "Now." The calm in her voice masked the internal whirlwind. What troubled her most wasn't the video, not the fact that it was real, not the caption. What unsettled her was the lack of noise from Elias. No public statement, no tweet, no demand. Just a brief message, hours earlier. Removed from 1A, no cause. Boarding pass verified. He hadn't asked for anything. That was what scared her. Because in her experience, the people who spoke immediately often gave you a window to manage. But the ones who waited, they gave you a trap door. Back on the plane, Kara stood stiffly in the front galley, her back to the cabin, organizing plastic cups that were already perfectly aligned. She could feel the temperature in the room shift, not literally, but emotionally. Conversations in first class had died down. There were too many eyes, too many silent questions in the air. And though no one had said anything to her directly, she could feel it. The way they avoided her gaze, the way they whispered as she walked by, the way that silence now followed her like her own shadow. A few feet away, Marisol leaned against the edge of the service panel, quietly scrolling on her phone. She saw the clip. Her thumb froze mid-scroll. There it was. Elias walking past her camera view, calm and silent. The tray curtain fluttering behind him like a verdict rendered in private. She looked up at Kara, then back at her phone. Marisol didn't say anything, but her expression said enough. Kara caught the glance, and for the first time in years, she wasn't certain which version of herself the uniform still belonged to. At Horizon's corporate HQ, Camille clicked open a new file. Emergency Preparedness Protocol, Tier 1 Incident Response. Her finger hovered over the internal incident code before she typed it in manually. Code 714 Elias, priority red. Then she stood and addressed her assistant, who had just entered with a printout of legal response templates. We're past press statements, Camille said flatly. Notify the board. Legal escalation is now active. The assistant hesitated. Camille, is it really that serious? She met his eyes. He gave us a chance, she said, and we failed. The pilot's voice broke the cabin silence, smooth and professional as ever. Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent into Washington, D.C. Please remain seated and ensure your seatbelts are securely fastened. But the words felt thinner than usual, like sound traveling through fog. In seat 1A, Elias Monroe sat motionless. The book still rested on his lap, but it hadn't been opened in the last 40 minutes. He hadn't touched his phone again, though it had buzzed several times. He simply stared out the window, watching the clouds part slowly beneath the wing. Then quietly a flight attendant approached from the galley. Not Kara, Marisol. She knelt beside him briefly, speaking in a voice too soft for anyone else to hear. Judge Monroe, ground security will be meeting you at the gate. There's a company executive team waiting too. You'll be escorted directly off the plane. Elias simply nodded once, slowly. No visible reaction, no comment. He didn't seem surprised. Meanwhile, Kara Benson remained in the front galley, gripping the edge of the counter with hands that had gone pale. She wasn't serving anymore. No one had asked her to. The service cart remained half-stocked, untouched since takeoff. She had been instructed, firmly, not to return to the main cabin. The curtain separating first class from the cockpit was closed. She stood behind it like a shadow, frozen. She didn't know what would be waiting when the aircraft doors opened, but she knew it wouldn't be silence anymore. She didn't check her phone, though it had vibrated twice in the past 5 minutes. She was afraid of what she might see, and even more afraid of what she might not see. At first, she thought this would blow over. A small incident, misunderstanding maybe, but the air felt different now, thicker. Inside the cockpit, Captain Richard Ames had just ended a call, one that chilled him far more than any turbulence he'd weathered in 20 years. Camille Rourke's voice was still echoing in his mind. He's not asking for punishment, he's demanding accountability. A statement like that, from a man like Elias Monroe, carried weight. Legal weight, reputational weight, structural weight. This wasn't about a seat anymore. This was about how the system had responded, and how many people had chosen to stay quiet while it happened. Captain Ames looked to his co-pilot, then picked up the in-flight phone again. He keyed in the code for gate dispatch. Confirm presence of legal and internal affairs team at gate 6B upon landing. A clipped response came through. Confirmed, legal, HR, security detail all in position. Passenger to be escorted first. Lead flight attendant to remain on board for questioning. He set the phone down and exhaled, long and low. The plane was still descending, but the fall from grace had already begun. In row 3C, Tyson Ford was refreshing his post every few seconds. Over 400,000 views now, and the comments kept coming. Professors, lawyers, veterans, airline workers, even a former flight attendant who wrote, We were trained for safety, not for profiling. This hurts. A woman seated beside him leaned in slightly, her voice hushed. That video, you posted it, didn't you? Tyson gave a small nod. She didn't say more, but she reached over and touched his forearm lightly. Not as thanks, not as approval, as understanding. Back in the galley, Kara finally sat on the narrow metal jump seat meant for takeoff. Takeoff and landing, her hands laid limp in her lap. She heard footsteps approaching, slow and steady. She knew it wasn't a passenger. She didn't look up until she heard the voice. It was Marisol. The captain said, "You'll need to stay on board when we land. Legal's coming up the jet bridge." Kara nodded faintly. "I figured." Marisol hesitated. "They're not angry, they're serious." Kara let out a dry laugh, no humor in it. He didn't raise his voice, not once. She looked at the metal wall ahead, her reflection faint and distorted in its surface. "And that's what makes it worse, doesn't it?" Marisol didn't answer. She didn't need to. The landing gear dropped with a deep mechanical groan. The lights above dimmed slightly. The final descent had begun. In the cabin, no one spoke. No polite chatter, no seatbelt fidgeting, no murmured comments about connecting flights. Even the click of trays being locked into place felt louder than usual. Passengers looked straight ahead, avoiding eye contact, not with each other, but with themselves. In seat 1A, Elias reached down slowly and placed the poetry book into his briefcase. Then he closed the zipper, placed his hand on top of it, and rested it there. Not clenched, not poised to stand, just waiting. The wheels touched the tarmac with a low, drawn-out rumble. A few heads lifted, a few breaths released. But no one moved. Not yet. The overhead light dinged, seatbelt sign off. Still no one stood. It was as if they all knew, consciously or not, that something far more important than arrival had just taken place. Something had been exposed quietly, ruthlessly. And for now, all they could do was sit with it, breathe with it, and wait for the door to open. The interview room was cold, not in temperature, in tone. Gray walls, no windows. 2 chairs on either side of a narrow table. A pitcher of water untouched. And overhead, the soft mechanical hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above. Kara Benson sat on the left, still in uniform, but the fabric no longer felt like it fit the way it had that morning. The seams seemed tighter, the wings on her name tag more like weights than pride. Across from her sat 2 individuals. One from Horizon Air's internal legal team, the other a representative from Human Resources. Neither smiled. Neither introduced themselves beyond first name and title. The legal rep, a man named Robert Glenn, tapped a small button on the table recorder. "This is a formal inquiry regarding passenger interaction aboard Flight 714. Lead Flight Attendant Kara Benson present. Statement requested regarding the removal of Judge Elias Monroe from his assigned seat in first class." He looked up. "Miss Benson, do you acknowledge that you instructed Mr. Monroe to leave seat 1A? Kara nodded slowly. "Yes, I did." "Did you review his boarding pass?" "Yes." "And it clearly stated seat 1A? "It did." "Was the name on the manifest consistent with his ID?" "It was." Her voice was flat now, mechanical. "But," Glenn raised an eyebrow. "But?" Kara swallowed hard. "He didn't fit the usual profile." A silence fell over the room. It wasn't angry. It was worse than that. It was measured. The HR representative leaned forward slightly. Her voice was calm, no hint of judgment. "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Kara hesitated. "I assumed he'd been upgraded by mistake, or that it was a system error." Glenn didn't write anything down. He didn't have to. "Did Mr. Monroe say or do anything that led you to believe he didn't belong in that seat?" "No," Kara admitted. "He was polite, quiet, professional." "Then what exactly did you base your assumption on?" Her lips parted, then closed. Words formed in her throat but never found a voice. Because the truth was simple, and that was exactly why it was so hard to say aloud. Glenn didn't push. Instead, he let the silence do the work. Then finally he spoke again, which is always this time, Bob. "You don't get to define who belongs. That's why we have protocols." Kara looked down at the glass of water in front of her. She didn't reach for it. Meanwhile, several floors above in the executive suite, Camille Rourke sat alone in her office reviewing a short message that had just been forwarded from Elias Monroe. It wasn't long. It didn't demand anything. There were no threats, no ultimatums. Just a paragraph quietly typed. "I've learned to be quiet, not because I don't feel, but because I must teach. In silence, we give others space to reflect or reveal. I hope this moment becomes both. E.M." Camille stared at it for a long moment, then forwarded it to the board with a single sentence attached. Consider this our starting point, not our defense. Back in the interview room, Kara was handed a printed document. Glenn slid it across the table without expression. This is your official notice of temporary suspension. Effective immediately. Final decision will follow pending board review. Kara took the paper with both hands. Didn't open it. Didn't have to. She knew what it said. The HR rep looked at her, softer now. Not as investigator, but as a mirror. Was it really a mistake, she asked gently, or something you never questioned? Kara didn't answer. She stared at the edge of the table, her fingers tightening around the paper in her lap. Because deep down, she knew. She hadn't followed procedure. She had followed instinct, but that instinct had been trained by something no manual ever wrote. And for the first time, she was beginning to see it, not from the perspective of uniform and protocol, but from the outside, from the aisle, from seat 1A. The apartment was still when she entered. No lights, no movement. Just the soft click of the door behind her and the faint buzz of a refrigerator across the room. The clock on the wall ticked like it always had, steady, unbothered. But nothing else felt steady. Kara slipped off her shoes, then moved slowly toward the hallway mirror. She stood in front of it, staring at her reflection for a moment too long. The uniform still looked pressed, badge still gleaming under the hallway light, but it felt wrong, out of place, as if it no longer belonged to her. She reached up, undid the top button, then the next. And for the first time in over 17 years, she didn't fold it neatly. She didn't place it in the wardrobe by color or by sleeve length. She simply hung it on the back of a chair, crooked, limp, tired. She sat down in silence, hands resting in her lap, unsure what to do next. 20 minutes passed before the knock at the door came. Soft, not urgent, but present. She opened it to find Marisol standing there in jeans and a windbreaker. No uniform, no name badge, no expectations. She didn't say anything, just held out a folded piece of newspaper. Kara took it. The headline read, "When a judge walked in silence, the world listened." Underneath was a still image pulled from the video. Elias Monroe, mid-stride, head high, briefcase in hand, walking the aisle that now felt so much longer in memory than it ever did in distance. Kara blinked slowly, her throat tightened. Marisol stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. She moved to the kitchen counter, poured 2 glasses of water, and set them down. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She had seen everything, and somehow she had come anyway. After a long pause, Kara finally spoke, her voice lower than usual, almost foreign to her own ears. "I didn't mean for any of this." Marisol gave a small nod, then very gently, "But you did it." Kara's shoulders sank. Later that night, long after Marisol had gone, Kara sat at her desk. The same desk where she'd written shift reports, passenger feedback logs, and employee evaluations. But tonight, there was no report template, no procedural checklist, just her laptop and one email. It had arrived hours earlier from an encrypted sender. Subject, reflection. She hesitated before opening it. Inside, it said only this: "I don't need your apology, but maybe you do, EM." She stared at those 8 words for a long time. Then slowly, she opened a blank document. Her fingers hovered over the keys. For once, she didn't know what to write. There was no training manual for this, no HR workshop, no uniform code, only truth. And truth was a harder uniform to wear than any polyester suit she'd ever buttoned. She began to type, not fast, not fluidly, but honestly. "I judged you with my eyes before I saw your humanity." The words sat on the screen like a wound, raw and real. She didn't hit send. She wasn't writing to be forgiven. She was writing because, for the first time, she understood. What she had done wasn't simply a mistake. It was a decision, one she had made without malice, but with assumption. And that was the root of it all. In a different part of the city, Elias Monroe sat in his home office, book in hand, coffee going cold beside him. His phone buzzed once. He didn't check it. He didn't need to. Sometimes silence was enough. The room was packed. Wood-paneled walls, soft leather chairs, and a long stage where rows of law students and legal professionals sat with open notebooks and sharpened focus. It was the closing keynote of the National Judicial Ethics Summit, and no one moved. Elias Monroe stood behind the podium, tall and composed, dressed in a simple charcoal suit. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked across the room, truly looked, as if measuring not their attention, but their openness. Then he began. "We've created systems of judgment," he said. "But somewhere along the way, we forgot that judgment begins in the heart." A quiet murmur of recognition passed through the room. Justice doesn't start in courtrooms, he continued. It starts in assumptions, in glances, in silences, and yes, even in airplane aisles. There were no gaps, no dramatic revelation. Most people in the room had already heard what happened. Some had reposted the video. Others had written op-eds. But here, Elias wasn't speaking about the incident. He was speaking beyond it. I didn't remain silent because I lacked words, he said. I remained silent because I've learned that sometimes, to teach, we must first allow others to hear themselves. He paused. The louder the world becomes, the more powerful restraint becomes. The room stilled once more, not because of the force of his words, but because of the space between them. Miles away in a modest community center on the east side of the city, Kara Benson sat in a circle of folding chairs, surrounded by 12 high school students. She wasn't in uniform, not anymore. Now she wore a simple navy blouse and held a clipboard in her lap. Her title read Volunteer Coach Life Skills Program. Today's topic was conflict resolution. The group had just finished a role-play exercise. Some of the students joked around, others took it seriously. Then a boy near the back, quiet until now, raised his hand. Miss Kara? She looked up. Yes? Why didn't he shout at you? The room quieted. A few heads turned. Kara set her clipboard down. She didn't rush the answer. Because he didn't need to, she said finally. His silence said more than words ever could. The students looked at her differently in that moment, some confused, some curious, some deeply thoughtful. No one asked what she meant, but they knew. Later that evening, Elias sat at his desk in his study, tall windows behind him filled with the soft glow of the setting sun. His inbox showed a new message, subject line blank. He recognized the sender instantly. K. Benson. He opened it. There was no greeting, no sign-off, no lengthy preface. Just one paragraph, typed plainly, quietly. I judged you with my eyes before I saw your humanity. And that judgment wasn't about a seat. It was about a failure I didn't know I was capable of. But now, I do. There was no request for forgiveness, no demand to be heard, just truth. Elias didn't reply. He didn't have to. Some truths didn't require answers, only acknowledgement. He sat for a while longer, the words still on the screen, before finally closing the laptop and rising from his chair. The courthouse was quiet in the early morning. Security nodded respectfully as Elias passed through the front entrance. The marble echoed faintly beneath his footsteps. Clerks looked up from their desks. Court officers nodded with a subtle deference not rooted in title, but in recognition. He walked with his usual pace, not hurried, not hesitant. He carried no briefcase this time, just presence. He stepped into his chambers, hung his coat carefully, and adjusted the nameplate on his door, though it had never been out of place. Then he walked to the courtroom. No one reminded him where he belonged, because now everyone knew he had always belonged. The world just needed time and silence to catch up. Before you go, take a moment to reflect. This story wasn't just about a judge or a seat on a plane. It was about what happens when silence becomes stronger than prejudice, when dignity stands taller than bias. Elias didn't shout. He didn't demand attention. But in doing so, he taught us all something deeper. True power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it simply refuses to step aside. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories. Your support means more than you know. It helps us continue creating stories that matter, that stir the heart, and that remind us of who we can be at our best. We're here to tell the stories that others overlook. And with you, we're just getting started. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.